Well, thank you for joining. I know we're at the end of the week, and we're right about on lunchtime, so I'm standing between you and probably a delicious lunch today being held by Microsoft Ignite event staff. But welcome to building a golden image pipeline. How do we take advantage of golden images in Azure using Azure Managed Images and the Azure Shared Image Gallery in an age of velocity and agility? Concepts like DevOps, infrastructure as code, and the way we think about IT is changing very, very radically, and it's hard to keep up with. There's no shortage of work, and we're being asked to do more and more. My name is Brad Stevens, and I am a cloud technical lead at CDW. What that means is I'm part of our professional services division, and I help deliver complex solutions to organizations of all sorts across all industry types, specifically focused on the cloud, automation, infrastructure as code, and DevOps. DevOps is one of those concepts I pay a lot of special attention to, specifically because it's one that I see the most challenges with. It's one of those things that means so many different things depending on who you ask. So to me, I work with organizations and help them understand that DevOps is really just an emphasis on business process automation. So how do we achieve that emphasis on business process automation with some of our everyday tasks that we do in IT? With concepts like DevOps, we're talking about the joining of development methodologies, approaches through automation, and applying that to the standard networking and security and access and control mechanisms of operations and traditional system administration. A lot of my time at CW the last 5 years has really required me and for our organization to really kind of pay attention to what's happening in IT. And I think that the definition of IT is changing, and I don't think IT really gets enough credit. Nobody ever really comes by and says, hey, thanks for keeping the lights on. It's only when things break that we get notified or get recognized, right? I don't really think that's very fair, because to me, when I think about IT, it's not just part of the business. I think that IT is really the business. When I think about how IT is serving up the products and the services of our organization, we can't do it without some kind of system or IT capability, right? So where does DevOps come into this, and how do we get into the golden image itself? Development and operations has kind of really lived in this chasm of despair for the last 20 years, and I think as a result of that, we've really learned to care about different things across different groups. Specifically, developers only really care about somewhere that's going to actually run their code, right? They only care about where that code is going to run and if it actually does what they think it's going to do. Which is why we oftentimes see them asking for that 40 CPU, 600 gig RAM server, right? Which usually translates to a very large bill that's going to make someone unhappy. So when I think about operations, right, we care about that. We care about how much you're spending, what are you asking for, who needs access to it, what network does it need to go on, how many networks does it need to go on. These are two different sides of the same coin, I think, today in 2019 and moving forward. Microsoft is really allowing us through Azure and the Azure platform to really kind of explore what that means when we get rid of this chasm of despair. And so what we at CW think is that the next 20 years is really going to be sort of a period of alignment. These two groups are going to come together even further and start working towards more general outcomes, collaboration amongst tools, the platform, and the process. And I think that one of the lowest hanging fruits in that process, in that equation, is the golden image. Every IT department has some kind of imaging process, right? I saw everyone in here shake their head yes when I asked if you knew what a golden image was. So what exactly is a golden image? Well, in case you are new, this is a pre-configured template of an operating system with all of your security updates, your patches, your software configurations, usually specific to your environment and your business needs, depending on the flavor of operating system that you choose. So when I think about why you would do a golden image, the biggest reason why you would choose to build one and spend the time to manage that is because you're trying to strive towards some sort of saving of time or errors and a level of consistency which leads to integrity and ultimately a faster deployment, especially when we think about the hundreds of desktops for our end users the servers that we provision up and down, especially from a virtual machine perspective. And some of the popular tools that I run into quite a bit are Semantic Ghost and Clonezilla, to name a couple of examples. These are great because they help alleviate some of that manual effort around going in and point and clicking, especially on a Windows operating system, and configuring it, which oftentimes equates to a lot of time and effort and energy, which I think could be otherwise spent on more valuable things. When I think about why we hire IT workers, I think about the knowledge that they possess. And oftentimes, we're stuck sort of keeping the ship afloat or mopping the floors. And so this is one of those areas where I see tremendous opportunity to alleviate time so you can start focusing on more creative and innovative things because you have the knowledge to do so. And so when I think about DevOps and infrastructure as code and the golden image, how do we take this to the next level? Some tools are now recently available and made open source out by the open source community, such as HashiCorp's Packer. If you don't know already, HashiCorp is actually here at Ignite. I encourage you guys to check them out. They're a big proponent in the infrastructure as code world, and they play very nicely with Microsoft Azure and some of the managed images and shared image gallery services. Packer is a tool that allows us to templatize our configuration through infrastructure as code to configure and deploy our virtual machines or our imaging process against Azure, VMware, or really at this point, probably anywhere you want to go. So when I think about what Packer's allowing us to do, it's worth exploring how we kind of plug this all in together. Specifically with the idea that, okay, Brad, if we go ahead and go with what you're saying and we decide to use this Packer thing you're talking about, what does that allow us to do and what can we do with Azure when we start leveraging it? Microsoft Azure has recently, not too long ago, made generally available the Azure Shared Image Gallery service. That service allows us to instantiate multiple images across multiple regions and even give it a versioning mechanism so that way we can propagate and manage the same way we manage our code and the way we release our code across many different areas. The Shared Image Gallery service is awesome because I think that it's really cool to be able to quickly spin up images and start moving more towards a self-service model for my sysadmins, my junior sysadmins, or those developers that are constantly always asking me to provision another server for them. It'd be really nice to be able to have some kind of service to be able to allow them to pick it up and run with it on their own. When I think about role-based access control, the cost of the service itself, and the mechanisms built in to help automate and give you the efficiency and the agility that you need as a business to be able to focus on other things, the Shared Image Gallery service is a great service to allow you to do that. So how do we plug this in together, and what does a golden image pipeline really look like? A golden image pipeline really starts with any other pipeline when we think about software development methodologies. Specifically, we have to come with some sort of code that we need to manage and develop. And if we're using Packer, it's no special scenario in that case that we're going to have to build it out and tell it exactly what we want to configure. What's nice about a tool like Packer is we can do it in a single file, in most cases, to be able to get the configurations that we want before we put it into some kind of versioning control system like Git or Azure DevOps. When we go to build the image, right, we're telling Packer and the Packer agent, go do this for me. Go out and grab me an image from the Azure Marketplace. Go out and grab this ISO from my JFrog Artifactory instance or my file share and build me my image, pack it up, and ship it out. Maybe in somewhere in between there, you're doing things like testing and validating that that image is actually being created the way you anticipated it to with your infrastructure as code as far back as that initial step where you're working within your IDE like VS Code. Before we finally get to a state such as our deployment mechanism or our release, if you will, and want to deploy it to a given environment. So when I think about Azure and the Shared Image Gallery and Packer and some of the abilities around infrastructure as code and the agility that that provides, I mean, we can really just say it's all software, right? Which is kind of an interesting concept because, I mean, I know that for me, when I was picking my career initially, I kind of had a choice. You either go software development or you can go IT system administration. I don't know about you guys, but I picked the sysadmin route because I was afraid of getting stuck in a cubicle for 8 to 10 hours a day with deadlines, not really talking to anybody. Kind of sounds a little miserable, at least for me anyways. I like talking to people. So IT system administration kind of allows me to do that. But today, I kind of get the best of both worlds with the marrying of those development opportunities with tools like Packer and a golden image pipeline, translate that to the business cases across traditional IT, and allow myself to really get more free time to do more fun and exciting things, maybe automate something else. So it's really just all software. So what do we want to really strive for here? Well, who here knows what continuous integration and continuous deployment is? Anyone show of hands? Everyone here knows what that is? You guys are all experts about that? Know it in and out? No? That's one of those other areas as a part of that DevOps story that oftentimes doesn't really plug into each other very well, at least from a very high level. It's a little difficult to explain what CI/CD is to a lot of organizations, at least in my experience. And so what I like to do is I usually kind of like to draw the visual, right? This is sort of the possibilities with a golden image pipeline. So what do we put in continuous integration? What do we put into continuous deployment? Well, I think that the first step is kind of like what you saw on a previous slide. We are going to build our package or code artifact using something like Visual Studio and version control it through some sort of source control mechanism and change management process associated to that before we start introducing the actual build process, in this case with a tool like Packer. I've got a couple other tools in there just to give you guys some ideas that I run into pretty often, Ansible and Docker being some mechanisms of the building portion of, let's say, our golden image pipeline. Before we eventually ship it out to some kind of artifact repository, the Azure Managed Images and the Azure Shared Image Gallery service allow us to kind of centralize the deployments of the configuration of the images that we're packing and serving up to the business and to our customers. The next step usually turns into some sort of build process. I mean, we've already kind of done some of that already when we created our artifact, but how do we continuously deploy this? Well, a tool like Azure DevOps allows us to really explore using a variety of provisioners, whether it's native ARM templates or Terraform, or even Kubernetes and Docker again, to allow us to rapidly deploy and spread across multiple regions the images that we need to present to the business and to the organization, to our developers and for ourselves as sysadmins. When I think about continuous deployment, we have several options of where we're going to put it. The runtime environment is usually a good thing to consider because we don't just have one subscription in Azure, right? At least hopefully not anyways. One mega subscription with just 1,000 resource groups, that would be a nightmare, wouldn't it? When I think about the environments and where we want to go, it's nice to be able to think about what this might look like when we want to move it to a development environment or a user accepting testing environment or production, staging, you name it. Continuous deployment using these provisioners is just one idea and one that we work towards pretty commonly at CW when we engage with our customers and the organizations that are striving to move towards this direction. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about runtime parameters, we're talking about runtime secrets, we're building it all together, plugging it in, creating what I'll call a value stream of tools or a value stream network of tools to allow us to achieve a high degree of velocity without introducing any additional risk, cost, or security vulnerability to the organization if we do it right. So what do we do here? We really just created a DevOps CI/CD pipeline, right? So when I think about golden images and their use case, I wanted to give you guys a couple of ideas and some things to think about because there's a lot to chew here. There's a lot of complexity. The world keeps getting more and more complex and difficult to manage. So how do we string it all together? And where do we start with golden images? The tips I have for everyone here today around golden images really is to have the goal of making as little images as possible to serve up that base stance across whatever variety of use cases you have for the business, the organization as a whole, or for your customers. I think there's really two different approaches to building golden images as well. You can either configure it and ship it as an artifact as is once you've packed it up, or you can configure it afterwards once you've actually delivered your initial base image, or maybe some combination of the two. I think it's a good idea to consider what your strategy might be because in some cases you won't run a tool like Ansible before you deliver, and in other cases you run it both before and after to configure your instances and your images post and pre-deployments when you're creating them. I would also suggest that, of course, this is always worth saying, we don't want to build any images or servers that have any keys or passwords in it. I can't tell you how many times I run into organizations where they've got plain clear text passwords that they just keep committing to their Git source and nobody bats an eye. That's just okay, apparently. don't do that. Seriously, don't do that. Everyone knows what an env file is, right? If not, talk to me after this. The point here is that in today's day and age, we really have a lot of opportunity in front of us to alleviate some of the time constraints that we've run into historically from an IT system administrative operational perspective. It's about time we start coming together and really analyzing what can we do to take this to the next level. To me, a golden image is the lowest hanging fruit, and it's one area I spend a lot of time in here at CDW and with our customers to help move the ball into the right direction. So with that, thank you.